which schism is my problem, I guess. Historically, there's been many schisms in the church, in specifically in the Christian church. So I guess we'll just start with explaining what is a schism. What does that mean? So I think most people realize the Christian church isn't just one monolithic group of people that all agree on important points of theology, God, and how to please God. Whenever there's disagreements on that basic idea of what's important to God and how do you please God, if you have a group of people who are all together and they start to disagree significantly about that point, pleasing God, God's purpose, God's plan, it's very likely that that disagreement will lead to two separate groups. So one group goes down the direction that they think is right, the other group goes down a path they think is right, and you end up with a schism, a separation of those two groups. So in Christianity, this has happened many times. Some of them are very small, light variations that lead to a split within a group, but the majority of what they believe is similar. It's still back to one root belief that, both groups are fine with. There's just this other thing they disagree about, so they have to split off and become a separate group. So this is how, after 2,000 years, we end up with so many different variations of Christianity, so many different branches of the tree, if you want to think about it that way. Her common roots in one unified body with all these different branches. That's the world of Christianity today. So some of these major splits or schisms are what define the big subcategories of Christianity today. The big schism that most people use to split the church, at least where I'm from, in the middle of the United States. This big schism, the most important schism, is the split between what is Protestantism and Catholicism, and that's the story of Martin Luther, 500 years ago, roughly, and this separation of a major group of Christianity from the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, headed by the Pope. Many reasons for that schism, but within those two groups, they still have much in common. The majority of the Bible is shared by both groups. There's some books that the Catholics keep in the Bible that the Protestants do not. But the creeds, the doctrine, what it takes to be saved, there's a lot of similarity there. Just some separation between whether or not you have to complete these sacraments in the Catholic Church or not in the Protestant Church. If you go back farther, though, the Catholic Church, when the Protestants split off, the Catholic Church is not really Catholic. This whole idea of Catholic means unified. And the church prior to the Protestant schism was not unified. If you back up another 500 years or so before Martin Luther, there's this massive schism that happens between the Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Eastern Church, and the Western Church, the Italian Church, the Roman Church, the papal authority of that church. So you have that schism like right around 1050 or so. And it's still a major thing in the world. This east-west separation that occurred at that time created these sort of competing factions that still exist. You see this, there are front lines in this war where these two groups bump up against each other. And you tend to see those frontline battles right on the edge of the two groups. And you can see that today in the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine is a country that is right in the middle of this east-west divide. Even within Ukraine, you have a lot of churches that are Eastern churches, and you have churches that are Western Catholic Protestant churches. So that division that happened in 1050, 1,000 years ago, still affects politics and just the operation of our world. That big schism in 1050 between the East and the West Church, that's called the Great Schism. But it was not the first schism. There were many others before that. Not as well known, more like small offshoot branches that some of those branches survived, some of them did not. Some of them still exist to this day. They don't get a lot of press because they don't have the geopolitical dynamics associated with them as you get with these other Protestant Catholic schism and the East-West Great Schism that happened. But I think it's important to realize there was a massive schism that occurred from the very beginning in the church. So if we go from 1054, let's just go back 1,000 years to 54 and what was going on at that time in the church. People have argued this point for close to 2,000 years now, that in those early days of the church, those early decades after the death of Jesus, that the church was just one group. The group was the church. But unfortunately, we know now that that's not true, because we have things like biblical scholarship and history and archaeology and the discovery of many, many additional sources from that time that people from my generation that grew up in the church, we never heard about these things. And it's because our pastors never heard about these things. Our priests didn't talk about these things. These divisions in the church in the early days, and just how important those were. But we have proof of these things in the Bible, specifically the fundamental beliefs of two very different branches, a schism in the church that existed from the very start. And we all sort of know about it if we read our Bibles, if we read the book of Acts, if we read the letters of Paul. The proof is there. The evidence is right there. It's very, very plain. It's easy to find. It doesn't take a degree in theology to see it. You don't have to go to seminary and study. We can go to the Bible and see this schism. And the schism is the separation between the ministry of Paul and what he is preaching in his ministry, which is not a short ministry. This is a decades-long ministry with multiple mission trips, wide geographical area of church planting and delivering of this new covenant, this new gospel, this new teaching as delivered by Jesus. You have the Paul side of the early movement. And then you have the other side. I think most Christians have been brought up to believe that this separation was just a minor issue, that there's nothing really to see here. of course, some difference of opinion is going to exist, and they'll work it out though. Just read Acts 15, or I think it's in Acts 15. Just read through that. They work it out. Don't worry. But that's what's used to just sort of smooth this over and sweep it under the rug and ignore it. Is a reference maybe to a piece of the story where you get some resolution in that piece of the story, and you're encouraged then to just look away. What was going on at that time was not a small disagreement. It was a fundamental disagreement about why did we have a savior? Why did we need a teacher? Why did we need something different than what existed? Why did we need a new understanding of God? And what was that understanding? Paul's version of the story is complicated. It's difficult to believe. It's confusing. It's contradictory at times. Within his own writings, it's contradictory. When you compare the priorities of Paul and the priorities of other members of the early church, and also the priorities as written in the Gospels, the priorities of Jesus, you can see there's more going on here than just a disagreement about food and what's kosher and what's not, or circumcision and whether or not you have to go through that as a convert to be saved. Those may have been interesting points of debate, but they weren't the real question. The real question was what did it mean to be lawful? What does it mean to be righteous? To be a good doer of the law? What did it mean to turn away from a previous way of living and thinking and interacting in the world to a new way, to a better way, to a Christ-like way? This is what created the schism between Paul and his ministry and the Church of Jerusalem and the ministry of James, the disciples of Jesus, and the early apostles, many of whom had followed Jesus from the very beginning of his ministry. Some of those people were following John the Baptist before Jesus even began his ministry after his baptism. That group, that Church of Jerusalem or Church of Jesus or Church of James, whatever you want to call it, had a very, very, very different understanding of living right and pleasing God. It was not the same religion. If you want to break it into a religious argument, it was no longer the same religion as the religion of Paul. Paul's religion was a religion of enlightenment, spiritual evolution, eternal life, sacrifice, atonement, justification through faith, and this future-looking apocalyptic coming of a glorified, spiritually perfected world where we would all receive new spiritual bodies, and we would be elevated into a position of glorification where we would rejoin God's family as glorified, perfected spiritual beings through faith in Jesus, who had become a glorified spiritual being. He was the precursor. He was the new Adam, that we would all become like this new version of man. Church of Jerusalem had a very different idea. The Church of Jerusalem believed in a kingdom of heaven, but it was in the sense of God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven. That the will of God is for the earth to operate in a way that is pleasing to God. And that way has become known as the Jesus way. The Jesus way was one branch of this schism. The Pauline way was the other way. The Pauline way didn't ignore Jesus. It was all about Jesus, but it was Paul's understanding of what Jesus was all about and what God wanted when he sent Jesus into the world. The Church of Jerusalem believed that the Jesus way fundamentally came down to two things: loving God and loving people. Loving God for everything that He's given to the world, and understanding that this all didn't just show up one day, a random collision of matter and energy that created this world, and that you should just take it for granted. It is everything comes from the Creator. So understanding that everything comes from the Creator, and our whole lives, this world itself, every one of us is a gift. This creation is a gift, and we should never lose sight of that, and we should always appreciate that and love God for that. That was at the root of the Church of Jerusalem, of the Church of James, of the Church of Jesus, that was operating down a different path than what Paul was operating. Because in this path, the second part of that path, humanity is special in the eyes of God. And humanity is a key part of the God project, that we were created for the purpose of bringing about God's kingdom, what God really wanted. It was up to us, humanity, to make that happen. We were created in the image of God, and our purpose was to create His kingdom on earth. And they had a way to do that, following the teachings of Jesus. It wasn't waiting for Jesus to return and conquer all the forces of evil, or waiting for an upgrade to a higher spiritual state that would somehow come from Jesus in a return trip to transform us into spiritual beings like Him. That all sounded a little crazy to the folks in Jerusalem who knew Jesus and who followed Jesus while He was alive, listened to Him as He preached, and took up the responsibility to continue to deliver His message. They continued His teachings in His way, and His teachings were about loving God and loving people, treating people the right way, avoiding the things that cause conflict and wrath and retribution and death and slaughter and covetousness and jealousy. And this Jesus way was a path of life. And on this path of life, when you treat people the way Jesus explains that we should treat people, these things like wrath and jealousy and covetousness and all the pain and suffering that comes from human conflict, these things go away when we start treating each other the way we're meant to treat each other, according to the Jesus way. And this was at the heart of the teachings of the disciples and the vast majority of apostles. But it wasn't Paul's way. Paul had a different idea. Paul's version is what we see in the early church. What eventually gets adopted as the Bible is a collection of books that are put together around the teaching of Paul, to support the teaching of Paul, and to continue the mission of the church according to Paul's branch of this early schism that happened in the church from the very, very beginning. If you just left it there, that would probably be hard to accept for most people, that is true. And it would be hard for most Christians to accept that that's true, that there was that big of a difference between these two groups. And Paul's side, which was separate from the church in Jerusalem, the disciples, the apostles, the anointed leader of that group, who was James, according to the Bible. To think that God's plan was to follow Paul's side exclusively and to ignore the other side. It's hard logically to understand why that would be God's plan, why that would be the purpose of all of this, that immediately after the death of Jesus and the beginning of the persecution of the Christians, that this other side in Jerusalem, the remnant of the Jesus following, which was 99% of the Jesus movement, survived the crucifixion of Jesus. The rest of the people in the Jesus group, all of his students, except for one, they continued to preach his message. It's in the Bible, this great commission that Jesus gave his followers. They followed through. They continued that. It shocks me that people don't want to know more about that other side, that other branch that separated from Paul. So I am surprised people don't want to know more. And so I ask myself why. And this comes back to religion and what religion does to us. Religion is not the same thing as faith. It's not the same thing as building a relationship with God. Religion is a set of parameters through which you understand God. Inside of a religion, you also need scripture. You need holy books. You need instructional teachings to follow. So the Bible, as it was constructed around the message of Paul and reinforced Paul's side of the schism. That process took hundreds of years to even coalesce into some kind of formal book. Paul was writing in 40s, 50s, 60s. The Bible in its current form, even within the Catholic Church, it's 300 years after Paul, before that collection of books is put together in a way to reinforce Paul's message and have Paul's message survive and be the foundation of the church and of the religion. And Jesus is in there. His teachings are in there. but whenever his teachings say this is what's important, and then Paul's teachings either directly contradict that or say, yeah, that's important, but this is ultimately what you have to do, even though this is important as well. Whenever we see that in the Bible, it is clear the religion focuses on Paul, not on Jesus. And so effectively what we have with Christianity now in all of its branches is this move back to the root or the trunk of the tree, which is the Pauline Christianity. The schism that has had the greatest impact on Christianity is that original schism between Paul and the Church of Jerusalem. That schism is the one that, in my opinion, is the most important schism to look at, to see what has been lost and to find some way of reconciliation. And if we can find the reconciliation around that schism, we won't really need to worry about the rest of the schisms. We won't have to worry about what happened in 1000. We won't have to worry about what happened with Martin Luther 500 years after that. We won't have to worry about all the separation that exists right now between all the different branches of Christianity, all of those problems, all of those issues that exist in Christendom with the accumulated effects of all of these schisms over the 2,000 years. They can all be solved if we can go back to this original schism between Paul and the Church of Jerusalem, James, the brother of Jesus, the successor of Jesus that led the church in the early days. If we can find a way back to solve that schism, then we can find a way to unify the church and also get Christianity back to its original Jesus message, which is not a message of exclusivity and division and insiders and outsiders, but a message of peace and love across all nations, all people, regardless of backgrounds, regardless of upbringing and understanding of God that you're born with. That if you can adopt the teachings of Jesus, not the religion of Jesus, if you can get back to those teachings through some kind of reconciliation of that original schism and bringing those teachings back into the primary focus of the faith, that's where the healing can come. We can't heal the church by getting Protestants and Catholics to agree on everything. Nothing changes. Nothing is fixed. If you take that a step farther and somehow the East and the West, the churches come back together and everybody apologizes and agrees that we can all be one family again, that's great. That's big improvement. That correction of that great schism in 1054. It'd be great if we could do that. Maybe these wars between Eastern and Western powers, we could find some peace if there was resolution to that schism. That'd be great, but it doesn't solve the real problem. The real problem is finally agreeing after 2,000 years that Paul, no matter how great his intentions were, no matter what you believe about him, if he was the greatest apostle and the greatest messenger of Jesus in the history of the world, you can think of Paul that way, or you can think of Paul as a liar, as a demon possessed purveyor of mistruths and lies. Like, wherever you put Paul on the spectrum, and people put him all throughout that spectrum, if you just get him back and reconcile his teachings with the early church, the rest of the disciples, the rest of the apostles, if you fix that division and bring those two back together and you accept both of those messages back into the church, you reclaim the original Jesus way according to his followers in Jerusalem, that repair of the schism would get us to a place where everyone could come back together, not just the Christians, but the Christians can come back together with the Jews and the Muslims and all of the Eastern religions and all the pagans and non-believers. There was a place back at the correction of that schism where you find peace. Not personal peace, like, oh, I feel peaceful, my heart is at peace. I mean true peace in the world. Because there was a message of peace that existed prior to the schism. But we can't get back to that place of peace unless that schism is fixed. Pauline Christianity has to accept the other side, and the other side has to accept Pauline Christianity. There's no other way to fix this. So, for those of you who watch my videos, I try to give a little bit more perspective of the Jesus way according to the Church of Jerusalem. A lot of what I say comes from that side. May seem strange, may seem sacrilegious or heretical at times, but it is the presentation of the other side of that schism that I'm doing most of the time on these videos. Sometimes I might be a little vague. I tread softly on some issues. I don't want to push people away that are on the Pauline side of the schism and push them even farther away from the Church of James and Jesus and the rest of the followers. I don't want to push you away. I want to bring you closer. So I apologize for my vagueness sometimes. It's done with good heart and from a place of hopeful reconciliation. So that's what I hope for. It's why I feel like I need to share and not just have this as a personal journey, is because the thing that I'm finding in my personal journey is that if we can somehow solve the split between the Pauline Church and the Church of Jerusalem, if we can get those two sides back together and we can reclaim the teachings from the early church that were lost, there is a place of peace and love and reconciliation within the body of Christ, the Church of Christ, the Church of Jesus, and the rest of the world that exists outside of Christianity. There is a way to take the message of Jesus to everyone, Jews, Gentiles, and to everyone else that you're not picturing in your head when you hear the words Jews and Gentiles. Everyone else could hear and see the story of Jesus from a unified perspective. I think we'd all be blessed beyond measure if we could get to a place where that's where the message of Jesus was coming from, was that original message before that great schism of the church that is discussed by Paul many, many times and by the book of Acts. I think there's a way back. We just have to be a little more open to talking about it and a little less defensive about our side of that schism. But it's the heart of the problem. It's where this all comes from, and it is the path to reconciliation. It all goes back to that early division. So I hope you learn more about what happened in those early years of the church. A lot more being said about it, and it's because we know a lot more. A lot of the secrets of the early church are not secrets anymore. So we can talk about them, find a way to move forward, come back together in peace and love. So praying for progress. There's progress being made. So just stay up. Love you all.